My world began to crumble in a classroom. Teacher Marty noticed his students were distracted by the sirens of fire trucks and police cars outside. The children reported another earthquake in California, and a large landmass had sunk into the deep sea. Marty tried to go online for news, but the internet was down. By the parent-teacher conference, everyone was restless, clutching their phones because there was still no network. Although Marty had all the students' paper files, it still seemed insufficient. Disconnected, everyone felt like the end of the world was approaching. Leaving work, Marty was stuck in traffic because the traffic lights had also stopped working. On his way, he saw a billboard. It was my name. Thank you, Chuck, for 39 wonderful years. News from all over the world was tinged with sorrow. The ocean was slowly swallowing coastal cities. Volcanic eruptions, wildfires, and tsunamis occurred consecutively. In China, people had started rioting. Meanwhile, Felicia, Marty's ex-wife, also felt it in the hospital. People just kept disappearing. Witnessing her colleagues leave one by one almost broke her spirit. She found a corner to rest, but the radio broadcast bad news and the message, "Thank you, Chuck, for 39 wonderful years." When a colleague asked Felicia if marriage or divorce was easier, she replied marriage, because it only took an hour, while divorce dragged on for months. That night, Felicia called Marty, confessing that she had thought about him all day. She wondered if divorcing couples were getting back together because people always seek familiarity in these difficult times. Marty also shared that his class had few students left. He began to philosophize about the universe and humanity's place. Then Felicia mentioned the billboard about Chuck that she saw, and Marty also admitted he had seen it. They wondered who would put up an advertisement in the middle of the apocalypse. After the call, Marty tried to watch TV, but the signal also vanished like the internet. A few seconds later, Chuck's face appeared, and a voice thanked him for 39 wonderful years. Then the signal went out again. The next morning, Marty noticed his neighbor wasn't using a car. The man explained that he had to walk nearly 5 kilometers to work and back because a sinkhole had appeared on the road, splitting the city in two and swallowing countless cars. Then they discussed the latest news. California was only 10% landmass, the Midwest was engulfed in flames, and Florida was flooded. Europe was in a similar state, and famine had raged in Asia. The Black Death plague had returned, and only a few bees remained, probably in South America. Just then, Marty saw many neighbors returning home because they couldn't get to work. The sinkhole had swallowed both their cars and their workplaces. Marty spoke to a friend of Felicia's who used to work at the bank and asked about Chuck's billboard, but she didn't know anything either. People wandered around looking disheartened. Marty's neighbor pointed out that they were going through the stages of grief. When things started, there were protests and riots. This was followed by a series of suicides. But now people had accepted the truth and were just waiting for the end of the world. The conversation was interrupted by a plane writing, "Thank you, Chuck," in the sky. On her way to work, Felicia noticed that all the walls were covered with dozens of graffiti dedicated to Chuck. She walked to the hospital, only to find that there were no staff or patients left. However, all the monitors were still active, with steady heartbeats. The hospital beds were empty, but all the monitors seemed to be connected to the same person. Sometime later, Marty was frustrated that the TV still had no signal, and when he tried to call Felicia, he discovered the phone lines were also no longer working. He decided to go look for her, and as he passed through town, he saw many abandoned cars and more advertisements for Chuck. Sam was resting on a bench, and Marty asked if he knew who Chuck was. But Sam didn't know. In fact, he had asked around everywhere, but no one had an answer. Since Sam was also going in the same direction, he and Marty walked together for a while. They chatted and philosophized as they discussed how much time a person truly has in life. Eventually, Sam's arthritis forced him to rest, so he stopped at a bench to watch the sunset, and Marty continued alone. In the evening, Marty arrived at Felicia's neighborhood. He met Iris, who recognized Felicia's name and said that she was always kind to the local children, even giving them cookies. Iris was rollerblading because she wanted to have a good time before the end. Suddenly, the entire area lost power. Just then, Chuck's glowing advertisements appeared on the windows of every house, making the place look like a ghost town. A worried Marty started running, and eventually found Felicia. The couple reunited in a hug. He asked about the advertisements, but she didn't know how they appeared in her house. Meanwhile, a 39-year-old Chuck lay in bed, looking very weak and ill. He was connected to a heart monitor, displaying the same heartbeat that had been shown in the hospital. His wife Ginny and son Brian were by his side, crying because they knew he didn't have much time left. Back with Marty and Felicia, they went to her backyard to gaze at the sky. With the power off worldwide, the stars were now brighter and easier to see. They held hands as they identified different constellations, only for one star to suddenly disappear. Then, Mars also vanished. One by one, stars began to disappear from the sky. At the same time, Ginny and Brian said goodbye to Chuck and thanked him for 39 wonderful years. Marty tried to tell Felicia he loved her, but everything plunged into darkness as the world ended. 9 months before the world ended, Taylor worked at a record store. However, she loved music so much that she liked to set up her drums on a busy street corner and play for the crowd. Occasionally she received tips from the crowd, but it was rare. Meanwhile, Janice was on her way home in a bad mood because her boyfriend had just broken up with her via text. She worked at a bookstore, but lately she felt her life wasn't going anywhere, especially since she used to be a very talented dancer as a child. Chuck was also in town for a banking conference. He was a successful accountant for a major bank, had been faithful to Ginny since he met her in high school, and was proud of Brian for being a good student. However, he was also unhappy with his life, because his job was boring, and he hated other accountants. When Taylor saw Chuck looking very serious walking down the street, she started playing an upbeat tune to lighten the mood. To her surprise, Chuck stopped in front of her, and after a moment of hesitation, he started dancing. Soon, a crowd gathered around him, including Janice, who needed something vibrant in her life. She also started dancing, so Chuck led her into the circle and they began to move together to Taylor's music. Soon, Chuck felt a headache, but he blamed his glasses and took them off before continuing to dance. The crowd clapped and cheered, enjoying the performance so much that they dropped tons of tips into Taylor's hat. Afterwards, the trio went to a coffee shop, and Taylor divided the money. Chuck looked a little sick, but he swore he was fine. Taylor wanted to know what made him stop to dance, and Chuck said he didn't know while his mind thought of his old band. When it was time for Taylor to leave, she hugged everyone and called them Forever Buskers. Then Chuck and Janice went for a walk together. Janice shared details about her breakup, and Chuck reassured her that she would be okay. After they parted ways, Chuck looked around the area and saw Iris rollerblading. He also noticed the empty street corner and couldn't stop wondering why he had stopped to dance. Later, when his illness made his body so weak that he couldn't chew or walk, Chuck would recall his dance and conclude that it was why God created the world. As a 7-year-old boy, Chuck lived with his grandparents because his parents had died in a car accident. Worse, his mother was pregnant when the accident happened. For a long time, the house was nothing but sadness. Albie dealt with his grief by drinking and focusing on his accounting work. Sarah lost interest in all her hobbies, and most of the time, she ordered takeout instead of cooking. By the time Chuck turned 10, the house had regained its cheerful mood, although Albie continued to drink. Sarah cooked again and listened to music so she could dance in the process. She often made Chuck dance with her, which explained why he learned all those great dance moves. They also watched many movies together, especially those with dance scenes. His grandparents' house quickly became Chuck's real home, but there was one exception. He was not allowed into the cupola on the roof. Albie and Sarah said the cupola was forbidden because the floor was unstable and there was nothing up there. Chuck secretly approached the door, but he couldn't pick the lock. The night before Chuck's 11th birthday, Albie and Chuck were watching a documentary about Carl Sagan and the cosmic calendar. Since Albie was very drunk, Chuck brought up the topic of the cupola. Albie said that up there, one could see more than they truly wanted, and that's why it was locked. He explained that the house was very old and had been renovated many times, but the cupola had been there from the beginning. Throughout his time living there, Albie only visited the cupola a few times. He claimed that in that room, he had seen the ghosts of people before they died. Albie said that waiting for death was always the hardest part. When Sarah came home, she told Albie to go buy some groceries so the fresh air could help him sober up. Afterwards, she told Chuck not to believe Albie's stories because they were just the ramblings of a drunk. Later, Chuck asked a neighbor about the dead people Albie had mentioned and how he was involved in their lives. It seemed that the ghosts were embodiments of Albie's guilt for not being able to help some friends. At school, Chuck's favorite class was English. The teacher was too sweet to be taken seriously, and the children misbehaved with her. One afternoon after school, Chuck asked her about a poem she had read earlier, which contained the line, "I am large, I contain multitudes." She explained that a person is made up of everyone they know, everything they have seen, and everything they have experienced. Each person has a whole world in their mind, and they can choose what to fill it with. Chuck realized that if someone died, that world would also disappear. This confirms that the first part of the story is a metaphor for the world in Chuck's mind, ending when he dies. On his way out, Chuck saw Marty in another classroom. A few months later, Sarah died while grocery shopping. After the funeral, the house became sad again, and Albie's alcoholism worsened. Chuck went to the grocery store and asked the cashier for details of what had happened. The girl explained that Sarah just suddenly collapsed, so there wasn't much to say. One night, Albie fell asleep at the table, and Chuck stole his keys to finally open the cupola. As he prepared to enter, Albie screamed and pulled Chuck out. Then, Albie went to the door to close it, but he saw something inside and immediately froze in horror. With trembling hands, he forced himself to move and close the door before realizing Chuck was crying. He comforted his grandson, who asked what he had seen. However, Albie said he shouldn't know and hugged him while apologizing. Later at school, Chuck learned there was a dance club and decided to join to honor Sarah. The teacher was delighted to see another boy because the club was always mostly girls, and she trained them to a different genre of music every day. Chuck was paired with Kat, an older girl, and also the best dancer in the class. He fell for her and tried to impress her with the dance moves Sarah had taught him, eventually teaching everyone. Kat already had a boyfriend, but she still agreed to dance with Chuck at their school's autumn formal. After the teacher gave him new shoes so he could be more comfortable dancing, Chuck thought it could be his career. However, Albie continued to train him in mathematics so he could have a future, as artists don't make money. Albie also explained that mathematics is in every corner of the universe, even in music, because of how it counts notes and tempo. All of his accounting records contained everyone's entire lives in the form of numbers. Mathematics is the art that doesn't lie. On the night of the autumn formal, Chuck refused to dance with Kat, using the excuse that his leg hurt. His teacher overheard and said that if he didn't want to dance anymore, that was fine, but he should at least be honest with Kat. Chuck went outside and looked up at the stars for a while to calm down and collect his thoughts. Then, he returned to the party and finally asked Kat to dance. They performed their dance in the middle of the dance floor and everyone gathered around them to cheer. Their dance was perfect, and in the end, Kat kissed Chuck on the cheek, which annoyed her boyfriend. 6 months before Chuck died, he told Ginny the truth about the scar on his hand. After the party, young Chuck went to the baseball field and continued dancing under the stars. He was engrossed in the feeling of freedom and happiness that dancing brought, and this distraction caused him to accidentally hit his hand on the fence. Ginny didn't understand why Chuck had lied about it, and he admitted that he didn't understand either. 5 years later, Albie died of a heart attack at home, while Chuck was out playing and dancing with his band. The funeral home employee Sam surprised Chuck by revealing that Albie had paid for his funeral because he knew this day would come, making Chuck wonder if that was what he had seen in the cupola. Since Chuck inherited the house, he decided to continue living there instead of moving in with his maternal grandparents. They eventually came to live with him until he went to college, as Albie also left money for his education. Later, when Chuck married Ginny, they also moved into that house. The funeral took place before his maternal grandparents arrived, so Chuck had to be alone during that difficult time. Then, Sam sent him an envelope with all of Albie's personal belongings, including the key. Chuck finally entered the locked room and found it empty with a perfect floor. When he looked out the window, he only saw the town. Feeling disappointed, Chuck turned to leave, but at that moment, he had a vision of his elderly self dying in bed. This confirmed that Albie had seen the deaths of all those neighbors, as well as Sarah and himself. This is why he thought the waiting was the hardest part. After the vision disappeared, Chuck decided to continue living his life to the fullest, refusing to surrender to despair as Albie had done. He reread the poem his teacher had taught, reminding himself that he contained multitudes. My story ends here. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching until the end of the video, and see you again.